For our first lecture, we are going to be looking at a few of these items about, some of these vector drawing techniques and something called the path and pen tool. So the pen tool and the paths tool are a cool way to add in some type of layers that are unique to your image. And you might have done these if you remember using the Gaussian blur in a background. It's something similar to that, but it's a bit more in depth as we're using vector graphics. Now, to remind ourselves about vector graphics very quickly, we had a slide from our previous course that described the difference between vector and bitmap, or the pixelated images. And let me just pull that up one more time. I don't have it on standby, but it is in the quiz review. So if you remember, the difference here between our vector and raster, or bitmap, I call them bitmap as well, is that the vector image, regardless of how big or small you make it, it's going to maintain its quality. So that's the benefit of having a vector image. And if you have a vector mask, which is what we're going to be working with in today's lecture, it makes it so that you can expand a mask and keep the quality, and it makes it a bit easier to work with some things. Excuse me. So that's essentially the only thing that you would like to know about vector and bitmap. It's not too in depth. That image in the quiz 2 review, I'll copy it around as well, but that's a very neat image to just showcase that the differences between it is that vector can be scalable at any size, whereas bitmap, if you make it too big or too small, it might look a bit blurry or a bit rough. So that's your difference there. And without further ado, why don't we try to go into our little station image here, and let's start our lecture here. So for today's participation, for today's lecture, if you want to earn the credits, if you go into your folder for new files, and then in your participation assessments here, again, I have to update the page here, but in today's session, for our session 1, all you're going to be doing is doing a small example of working with paths using this image, or you can use any image that you like. I'm not too picky. Excuse me. As long as you know how to use the path and maybe add on a few things in it that I'm going to explain how to do it during our lecture. But all you're going to need to do is shift around an image of your choosing and make a few paths on the image and then put a few vector masks on those paths. So that sounds very complicated, but as we go through this lecture, I'll break it down for us and we're going to be able to essentially do what we need to do in this participation. So I'm actually going to go ahead and restart my Photopea. And for today's session, I'm going to go into our 141 homepage, and then content, folder for new files, and then under session 1, excuse me, there's a station.jpg image. So why don't we go ahead and download this station image, and I'm just going to go open up my Photopea again, and you can do this any way you'd like, but I'm just going to go ahead and drag it in. And now there's usually a ton of stuff that we used to do in DM140 with this image. But just as a reminder, again, it's only been a few days, but remember we have our layers pane over here. We can hide and show the layers that are visible. And we have all of our tools. Remember, we have the select layer and all that stuff as well. So it's a very neat little tool to help us out with, there's lots of neat tools here to work with. But the one that we're going to be working with is something called the pen tool and paths. So if we take a look at our syllabus again, we notice we hear about paths and the pen tool. So what essentially are paths? Well, if you go here to your layers pane here, there's something called the paths pane. And if you go ahead and click on it, you'll notice it's usually empty. But essentially what your paths are some type of selection on your image that you can use to then modify that image. And so my paths are empty, so how do I go about creating a path? What do I do here? Well, why don't we go to the bottom of our paths image here, and you'll notice that we have something at the very bottom to the to the left of the delete down here. Might be a little hard to see, but you have your trash can delete, and then you have this folded in paper that says new. So all I'm going to do is hit new, and you'll notice I get a new path in my history. And I have my path 1 here, and you'll notice it looks a bit like the layers, right? So it seems like it has a layer there, but what's missing? I can't really hide a path, as you can see here. The path isn't visible or invisible, it's just going to be there. So now I have my path, and the path again is a way that we can modify our image here. But how do I go about, excuse me, how do I go about using this pen tool that is being talked about here? What exactly is the pen tool? Well, the pen tool, if you go over to the T for your text and you go down by 1, you'll notice we get this pen for short case as P. And this tool, if we click on it, allows us to kind of just drag around like normal. But if I left click with this tool, you'll notice that I just put in a little dot on my image. I'm actually going to go ahead and undo this really quick because I want to put it in an area that's more visible. So let's say right here, I just left click with my pen tool and I have a dot down. So that's all the pen tool does right now. What happens if I go over, let's say here, and I click? Well, it seems like I still just have a straight line. So what's going on with this pen tool right here? What's happening? If I go up a little bit, maybe, you'll notice that what happens is it created this big red triangle, that it's following this path that I'm creating. And again, I'm just clicking once, I'm not dragging or anything. And it's creating a shape. And what type of color is the shape going to be? Well, if I go up to the fill up here, I can actually change the type of fill. So I can maybe do gradients. I could do pattern. I know a few of us did pattern in the capstone from last quarter. And I can also change it to just see solid fill colors. So let me do this gradient because it's a bit easier on the eyes. And now what can happen here? With my path, I'm just going to keep clicking around, and I created this kind of weird image, and I'm just going to go ahead and at the very end, I'm going to click back on my original image, or excuse me, my original button that I placed down. So if I click here, you'll notice that the shape to shape path appears inside of my paths panel here. So there's a new panel inside of my paths, and if I go to my layers, you'll notice that I actually get two new I got two new shapes because I messed up my first pen. But you'll notice if I delete this one, I have this new shape. And I can actually hide this shape, and I can select the shape as I'd like. And then, if everyone remembers from what we said earlier, what was the difference between these vector and bitmap images? Well, because the paths are vector, I can go into edits and free transform with this shape. I can go ahead and make it pretty long or big or small, but you'll notice that the quality is still the same. It might be a bit hard to see with the single color, but this shape is going to maintain its quality irregardless of how big or small I make it because it's a vector-based shape. So again, on the quizzes and stuff in the future, there's a lot of questions about vectors and bitmaps. Just remember that a vector is able to be dragged and, excuse me, I forgot about that, is able to make bigger or smaller, sorry about that, without losing any of its quality. And you're able to drag it around as you'd like. Now, I free transformed it, and I'm going to hit OK. And that's pretty cool. So that's what the pen tool does, apparently. We are able to make a shape, and it's a vector-based shape, so I can make it as big or as small as I'd like. But that's not the best for myself, right? So, like, how do I go about, and if I look at my participation policy, you'll see that I have black and white over here, and I have this purple on my trash bin. Like, how do I go about getting that layer there? Well, why don't we go ahead and delete our shape? And in the paths panel, I'm going to delete the, oopsie-daisy. Looks like I can't trash this just yet. I'm going to delete that paths, and the way I deleted that path is by clicking on the path inside of the paths channel, going to the bottom, and hitting the trash can that's down here. So just like I did earlier, I'm going to go ahead and open up a new path, and I'm going to select it so it's highlighted in my paths pane. And I'm going to go back over to my pen tool. Now, again, if I just went ahead and did what I did again, I would just make a shape using the selection boxes. But what happens if I go up to the top left up here? You'll notice that there's a drop-down arrow next to the word shape. If I click on that, you'll see there's a little word here called path that I can pick. So now some wheels might be turning here. So if I select path and I go back to my path over here, I select this and I have my pen tool selected. When I go ahead and draw out and click, right now I'm clicking around the place. Does everyone see how it's not making the shape anymore? So I'm not making the shape that I did before. Remember, I had that big red triangle from earlier. I'm just going to go ahead and draw it around. But if you take a look at my path pane here, everyone might be able to notice what's going on here. So does everyone see how it's actually getting white in the thumbnail over there? And I went ahead and connected the path there, and you'll see when I connect the path, it says close path up here. That's how you'll know it's done. But you might notice now that this path that I worked with is now white in the center. Now, if I select the path and the move, and the move command as well, you'll notice that I'm not able to move the path like I did earlier, because the path from earlier, the red triangle trapezoid, was actually a layer that I can move. So what happens if I created this path and I don't like how it looks here? Well, what I could do is I can go to something, I can right click underneath this pen tool, and there's something called path select. If I select path select and I right click on it, there's something called direct select underneath it. Now this sounds complicated, but essentially what direct select does is if you go back to your circles, you see how it gets highlighted? You can actually just move around your circles again. And remember, if I move it into here, does everyone see how the white gets cut out there? It's kind of like a big Pac-Man mouth almost. That's kind of eats something. So I can go ahead and move around my path as I'd like in order for us to recreate a path that I didn't like before. So now there's another good question here is, what's the point of us doing this, right? Why did I go ahead and create a path that's in this paths pane here, and I can't move it, and I can reformat it using this direct select tool, but I can't do much about it? Well, the reason that we create paths is to make a very specific way to outline and kind of texturize some items. So what I mean by that is, let's just say, let me restart our path really quick. Let's just say that I want to make something that in this colorful photo, black and white. So let's say that I want to make my trash bin that's right here a black and white trash bin. What we can do then is select the pen tool, make sure it's on path, and then I'm just going to click here, and then I'm actually going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit on my trash bin here. Now, again, this is a bitmap image because if everyone sees, it's a bit low quality, but that's fine. I'm going to have my pen tool selected, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and trace, excuse me, the outside of this bin here. And now I'm doing it doesn't matter how many dots you create, they don't have to be perfect right now. In your project, you'll do something similar to this, but with an orange. And I'm just going to go ahead and keep going up, and then to the edge, and then back. And then, now here's a great question. How do I know when my path is done? If I click on the end circle, I get a little anchor up here that says close path. And now, because I'm zoomed in, it looks a lot bigger, but if I zoom out, you'll notice that in my work path, it's very hard to see, but there's a little white outline that's similar to what we had before. Now, with my path, while it's selected, I'm just going to go ahead and click. So let's say that I want to deselect the path here. The way that I can do this is going to the paths layer pane and then clicking underneath it so that I just click out of it there. If everyone sees that, I can deselect like that. Now I'm going to go back to my layers, and I have my background selected here. And I created a path that's in this layer. But you'll notice that I wanted to make this black and white, right? How do I make this black and white? Well, we remember from DM140, if we can apply a black and white filter. So I'm going to go to layer, and then layer style, or let's see here, new adjustment layer. Apologies there. I'm going to apply adjustment layer. And then in adjustment layer, I'm going to go down to black and white. I'm going to click on black and white. And unfortunately, if everyone sees there, my entire image is black and white. So now how do I go about fixing this? Well, you'll see I can enable and disable this black and white. I'm going to leave it enabled. And I notice that I have my work path. I'm just going to rename this by double clicking on it. I'm just going to call this trash bin path. And I don't know what to do here for right now, right? So I have my black and white selected. My path is selected here. I'm going to go ahead and reselect my path over here. So how do I go about making just this bin black and white? Well, what I can do is inside of, oops, daisy. Sorry, everyone. There's a few folks in the waiting room. Let him join in. Awesome. Sorry about that. I didn't see the waiting room right away. So anyway, after I'm recording this so I can upload it again in case anyone misses a little bit of it. But anyway, after I have my layer, my black and white layer, adjustment layer applied, and my path selected, what I can do is go up to layer, and then you'll see down here, this is inside of our syllabus two, something called a mask, a vector mask. So if I go down this layer, you'll notice I have something called a vector mask. And if I highlight this vector mask, what do you guys see? Current path. So if I select current path, now all the black and white disappeared except for the black and white that's on my path, which is the trash bin, right? And of course, it's able to add in a new path that's right here, the shape path, and we can see both of them there. But essentially what happens here, it's a bit hard to see, but I'm able to create a path that's around my trash bin that makes it black and white essentially. So that's essentially what you're going to be doing in your project one, and I'll go through project one after this as well. But again, what I want you guys to do for your participation for today is I just did an example of doing it on a trash bin, but maybe you could try it on the roof over here as well. So another cool thing about the pen is you'll notice that I was clicking everywhere, right? I had to click around and then I have to go all the way back, and it's click by click, so they're all straight lines. If you right click on the pen tool, you'll notice there's something called free pen. And you can actually go ahead and you can just draw it. It's a little bit odd because it has to make a little path for us. But if you'd like, you can also freehand your paths here. And, oh, I actually, after you select free pen, make sure that the path is selected up there. I did that one on purpose. And I'm just going to freehand draw around the top of this station roof here. Keep going around. And then after I have it like freehand drawn, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to make sure my work path is selected. I'm going to go to layer, new adjustment layer, and this time I'm going to make it very red. So let me go to color balance and let me make it super red. And now you'll notice that the entire image is red, right? I don't like that too much. So after I make my entire image red and my work path is selected, I can go to layer, vector mask, and current path, and then it's a bit harder to see, but we're able to see the red on it. And now the cool thing about this is that these are layers. So if you want to see what it looks like without the vector mask on it, you can just hide it. As you can see here, it's a bit choppy at the edge there, but if you were able to do it exactly with the dot by dot thing, you can make some really cool changes to some images. You can make stuff very blue or very red, and this might be interesting for your capstone, or if you wanted to touch up a certain photo, you could definitely go about it in a way to make certain aspects of your image more colorful like this. And with that being said, that's all there is to Pat. So you guys, for today's participation session, all you guys would need to do is pretty much follow what I did here. I created a few paths, and again, I talked a bit more about it to get the concepts down, but it's pretty straightforward. You go ahead, you create a path. When you select your pen tool to make the path, make sure that it's not on shape or pixels, or make sure it's on path only, because shape will draw out stuff for you. After you do that, you need to add in your adjustment layer. So you can go down here, or you can go up to layer, new adjustment layer. And then after you add in your adjustment layer, what you want to do is go to your paths, select which path you want the layer to be on, and then you go to layer, vector mask, and current path. And then that's all there is to it. So for today's participation, if you guys would like to just, as you can see here in this image, I made black and white randomly over here, and I made this purple. You could do whatever you want to the image, but try to work with at least 2 or 3 paths. Definitely, I would say the garbage can and the roof are pretty fine for you guys to work with. But if you guys would like to do that in your own time for today's participation, and then email me that at jlynch@csi.now, that would be great. And as a reminder, if you are ever confused about the participation policy or what you need to do, you can go to content, folder for new files, and there's a PDF here that I kind of went overboard with it, but it pretty much explains everything you need to do. And I'm gonna fix this up right away after this lecture. But you can look at that, and then each session we have, this gets updated with something new to do.